Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about Firefight. We're going to do a league list preview. Currently I'm in a 1250 point Firefight league, and we're going to do a preview of my list. And we're going to talk about it, and then we're going to talk about my upcoming matchup with Plague, which is happening today, Thursday. And we'll talk about what I see as the tough parts of that matchup. Before we dig in, there's some announcements. I will be at the Michigan GT, so I look forward to seeing everybody that's going to be there. Again, I'll be running a tournament the day after Michigan GT. Unfortunately, that's just the way my schedule has lined up this year. That's at Knoxtoberfest. I've had some people reach out already, and it's looking to be a pretty decent-sized event, so I'm excited for that. And if you're in Lansing for the Michigan GT and you don't mind making a 3-hour trip down to Knox, Indiana, I invite you all to come play in the tournament. It's going to be a good time. We're going to have trophies made up, plaques, type of thing, not like big trophies, but more like acrylic plaques, things like that. I'm working with Litco right now actually to get those made up. So speaking of Litco, also if you saw my super cool Firefight tokens, make sure you get yourself a set. I'll put that link in the description, but that's not what we're here for, is it? So let's go ahead and jump right in to the video. First off, I know I have ragged on dwarves. I have been vocal about them being the poopiest of duties and how much I don't like dwarves in every game. And again, I did stumble into some dwarves. There's a whole big backstory behind it. I'm not digging into it right now. If you're really hard up and want to know, you can reach out to me offline. But it's just one of those things where I ended up getting a dwarf army, and I have had a second Firefight army about 4 or 5 times now. And every time I get one, what ends up happening is I teach people how to play. And they're like, oh, that army I used is really cool. Can I just buy it from you? And I'm usually just like, yeah, all right. Because I don't care. I'm just happy to have people to play with in my community. But what that's done is that's gotten rid of a Plague army, a Marauders army, a Night Stalkers army, and an Enforcers army. So it's one of those, like, I am the type of player I have to have 2-ish armies, sometimes more, for games that I play, just because I don't like doing the same thing over and over again. I dedicate a lot of my free time to making sure I get to play games. So every Friday is our big game day, and I usually get 2 to 3 games in on a Friday, and there are weeks where I get extra games in throughout the week. Like this week I played a game with my daughter. Tonight is my league game. Tomorrow I have to play a 40K game for a 40K league that I jumped in just to kind of dip my toes back into that. Still not a big fan, but I'll have that, and then I'll have at least 1 to 2 games of Firefight. So by the end of the week, Firefight alone, I'm going to have 3 to 5 games in. And so playing the same army over and over and over, it gets old for me. So I always try to have 2 on deck for games that I'm playing very regularly. Games like Old World, I can have 1 army because I don't get to play that often enough. Kings of War, I don't get to play it often enough, so I can sit on a single army. I've built a bolt action army, and I really want to get into Conflict 47, but I just don't have a local community for it. So now that I've had that big tangent, and if you aren't used to my tangents, you must be new to the channel. Let's actually talk about Forge Fathers. And that's actually what started the tangent, was talking about how I don't like dwarves, but then I stumbled into dwarves. Forge Fathers, to me, are an interesting army, and I guess before I dig in, Lee, if you're out there watching, I didn't forget about your GCPS breakdown. And now that the command protocols are out, I'm going to start working on that again. So I didn't forget about you, buddy. It is coming. But Forge Fathers are kind of a weird army, especially coming from stuff like Veermen or Night Stalkers. Because oh man, they're weird. They've got low volume shooting, but they have the potential to bump it. They have low volume melee, but it's very efficient. They kind of play like a more elite Enforcers army, where everything can, not everything, but a lot of the units can kind of be multi-purpose, but they just, instead of 2 hit points, have heavy armor. So they could be kind of hard to shift off of objectives, things like that. And you don't have to play everything with heavy armor. I think the Brockers, however you pronounce it, Brocker, I don't know. I'm going to call them brokers. And so the brokers, I don't think they have heavy armor. You can get militia, which are troops. They don't have heavy armor. And you know, there's a handful of offerings that don't have heavy armor, but if you wanted to, you could absolutely play all heavy armor, and I am. Mostly out of necessity, not out of choice. I picked up, I came into about 1,250 points. I think it was 2 of the old starter boxes, and when I put them together, it came out to 1,250 points, and I built them the way I wanted them, with a couple of exceptions, which I'll talk about when we get there. So for my command units, and we'll talk about the orders and everything while we do this, because this has been a neat journey for me. It has actually kind of tempered some of my disdain for dwarves, because playing with them has opened my eyes to what it is like to play with them, as opposed to just playing against them. Playing against dwarves is not usually a fun journey. You know, playing against dwarves is usually a very uninteractive game in most games. It's very just boring, for lack of a better word. So, for my command units, Steel Warrior Huskarl. He's just a Steel Warrior. He does assault on 4s. He shoots on 4s. He has 2 hit points. You know, 3 up nerve, which is pretty handy. But overall, he's just a Steel Warrior. He does have Headstrong, heavy armor, and that's... Headstrong, I think, is fairly universal in the army. I'm still learning some of the units. And I will work on a Forged Fathers breakdown as well. I might work on that while I work on the GCPS one, just kind of do them side by side or in tandem. Inspiring, which is nice, especially because everything has very good nerve. They're kind of like Enforcers where it's all 4-ups, 3-ups. Tactician, orange, so he does give an orange die. And that's one thing you're going to notice is that unless you take some pretty high-costed units, and most of your units are high cost, but unless you take some of the really high-cost command units, you're going to be, I don't want to say command point starved, but you're going to be managing your resources more so than, say, with Plague. And that's just and I think that's intentional, and I don't think it's bad, because some of their orders are really good. Like, his order is Precision Optics. 12-inch aura of all units gain the control, fire, and marksman keywords. That's really good. Now, again, most of your stuff isn't going to have a ton of volume. There's a handful of units that will. But with heavy armor and good armor, you know, Steel Warriors, for example, are armor 6 with heavy armor. So unless something is throwing just a million dice or anti-tank dice, you're going to be able to win assaults just based on attrition. You know, the inability of your opponent to damage you is going to win you more assaults than your ability to damage them. And being able to control fire when people are coming in is going to make it better, because those count for damage resolution, or combat resolution. So that's really good. And Marksman is reroll hit rolls of 1. And I think all of this army, and again, I'm still learning, but most of it, if not all of it, shoots on 4s. So hitting on 4s, rerolling 1s, really good. Like, that gives you a really good level of efficiency. I have him kitted out with the pistol and the Forge Hammer. You can give him a rifle. I just kind of didn't care. The 12-inch range, I've got him by himself. He doesn't have any friends, but I'm going to have to start bringing friends, and we'll kind of dig into that in a minute. But I'm not worried about it. If he gets into melee, he gets into melee. Because I'm running him by himself, I'm spending most of my time trying to hide him anyway. I also have a Forge Guard, Huskarl, which is, if you're newer to Firefight, but you come from 40k, if you're like me where you have an extensive 40k background, I do try to make some 40k analogs for those players so that they understand what it is you're getting into. Think of the Forge Guard as kind of like Dwarf Terminators, or the Dwarf analog to a Peacekeeper. So he's 3 hit points, and if you notice, they are slower. They're 5'10 instead of 6'12. He's 3 hit points, he's armor 7, he's heavy armor, he's inspiring, he's tactician orange, he has controlled fire baked in, he's headstrong, and then his aura is a 6-inch aura of everything but vehicles gets the regeneration keyword until the end of the round. And again, very good. When you're talking about units that are really durable, armor 7, heavy armor, armor 6, heavy armor, and you're relying more on not dying than killing, the ability to bring these very static, stoic models back into your unit is very useful. 6 inches is kind of short, so he's got to be kind of nut to butt with everybody that you want to have that aura, but that's okay. I tend to keep him around my Steel Warriors because I'm running them in units of 8 because of whatever that ability is, gives you bonus unit strength. We'll find out in a minute. But homie's got the rifle and a forge hammer, 3 dice AP1, so he's nothing crazy. He's just a very good sit-there unit. Again, he doesn't have any friends, probably because he's a dwarf. That being said, I usually run my characters mono, but with the changes to the core rules from the command protocols, there's going to be an important shift that's going to need to happen for the way I play. With a lot of indirect weapons getting cut down in points, you're going to see more indirect. And with pinning interacting with command orders the way they do now as well, I think you're going to see some players trying to bring indirect to try to like pinning shots onto commanders to shut off auras. And not only that, if I've only got one model and I get hit with indirect, there's a good chance I just lose that model. So it's going to end up being about time to start bringing friends with my characters, my commanders. So just something to keep an eye on as the protocols kind of shift the meta, so to speak. I would not be surprised if you start seeing some of that at some of the bigger events out there, is, you know, just like a lot of indirect because of the points drop, like the plague mortars went down in points, a few other things. Just throwing it out there. On to troops, I do have the APC. I think a mechanized dwarf army is probably going to be a very good way to play, even if you only have 1 or 2 APCs. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I think the APCs do what they need to do. You can give them armor 8. It does reduce their speed from 612 to 69, but heavy armor with armor 8 is a good place to be at, because you're still, if you get hit with like an AP4 weapon, they need 4s now instead of 3s. And if something is vicious, you know, it still gives them like a 25. It's actually a little bit more. But the way I look at it is ones won't fail, at least not off rip. So it still gives you that little 25% buffer zone instead of just a 12.5% buffer zone. Again, I understand that that's not the exact math. I'm just telling you kind of my perspective on it. It does have just the same rifle. It's got 2 dice, AP1, Blaze Away, and Trademark, so that's kind of cool. And then, like I said, I have 3 units of Steel Warriors, and they're all kitted out exactly the same. They are Headstrong, Heavy Armor, Overwhelm. That was the word I was trying to think of earlier. Overwhelm 8, so as long as there's 8 or more models in the unit, they get bonus unit strength. So 8 of them is unit strength 3. So I have them at 8 models. And then I try to keep the regen dude next to homies so that he can try to keep them as close to 8 as possible, if not at 8. They do have suppressive fire, and if you don't know what suppressive fire is, that's effectively, it's a charge reaction where you get to blaze away as your charge reaction, so you don't get a full-on shoot like controlled fire. So you will get 1 additional die for all of your blaze away weapons, and then in addition to that, any hits you sustain hitting on 8s only will give a pin. So that's actually kind of useful, because if you can get that pin token on a charging unit, that can shut off their charge bonus, theoretically. Like, they won't get the +1. They still will. It'll just be +1, -1. But if they're blind charging, for example, not only would it be hindered, so they wouldn't get the +1, because it's blind, they would net a -1. And then if you could pin them on the way in, that would net another -1. So you could take a unit that's base hitting on 3s and shift them to hitting on 5s in like a perfect world. Just something to think about. I have 2, the sergeant just has a pistol and a hammer, and again, he doesn't need it. He probably could or should have the rifle. I just try to have a melee loadout on my sergeants for very shooting units, because if they get charged, I want to at least be able to have a chance at winning the assault. And having 2 extra dice at AP1 could be the difference. I do have 2 magma cannons. They are a single shot, but they're AP4 anti-tank, devastating 2 with targeting systems. So I have 3 squads with those, which means I have 6 anti-tank shots coming out of my troop squads. And a lot of that is because I'm not going to have a ton of anti-tank platforms. I do have a tank, but it doesn't have the anti-tank gun. So that allows me to spread my anti-tank shooting out. Again, remember, I'm coming from the perspective of I don't necessarily need to kill the tank or vehicle specifically, or something with heavy armor. If I can punch through it and get damage on it, that's good. And then not only that, if it's a vehicle and I can shoot it, it can just get pinned. So it's one of those where if I can do that damage, and I can give you that damage with an anti-tank weapon on your vehicle and give you a pin token, I'm fine with that. Because that means it's not going to get orders most of the time. That means it's not going to be able to steady aim in most situations. I'm not going to say all, because there might be some exceptions. But, so we've got those 3 units of Steel Warriors, and then I've got 2 units of Ham Fist Drop Troopers. I did look at Forge Guard, but for what I wanted, I felt the Hammer Fist Drop Troopers were better. And after I talk about the list, I'm going to pull up both and we'll kind of look at them side by side and talk about why. But they have aerial deployment, which was one of the big pulls for me. They have anti-grav, they have headstrong, and they have heavy armor. They do only have 1 hit point, which is one of the big differences between them and the other boys, Forge Guard. So they've got 1 hit point, but they also get anti-grav, and that's really helpful. The leader has the Light Forge Hammer, which is 2 dice and AP1. The rest of the squad has the Light Forge Hammer, 2 dice and AP1. They get the Inferno Drills. The Inferno Drills are 2 dice AP2 anti-tank. So that means if I come down from Deep Strike, for all you Warhammer players out there, if I come down from Deep Strike, aerial deployment, whatever you want to call it, I'm sorry, Firefight community, it is just forever going to be Deep Strike to me. I started playing 40K when I was about 15 years old, and I am now 42. You know, so we're talking about 25 to 30 years of Deep Strike in my brain. It's just always going to be Deep Strike. But anyway, so they can come down, they can throw their 10 dice as long as they're within 12 inches of a target. They can't get any orders if they start off the table, at least not the turn that they come in. But that's okay. What they can do is they can come down and they can throw 10 dice hitting on 4s. And in most situations, if you position them properly, they're going to hit on 4s. But even if they hit on 5s, you're going to drop 5 of those dice. And then if something's armor 8, you're going to damage it on 6s, right? That's still going to give you 1 to 2 damage that punch through on average. And it's anti-tank, so you're going to be able to pin that vehicle. Where they have really been good is into matchups where a player has, like, they have some sort of, I believe we talked about it last video where I called it a linchpin unit, right? Where they have this anchor that just sits in the back. And I have one too, as we're going to find out. It's the Sternhammer battle tank. Again, you know, an assassin tank, for example. If I can wait for that assassin tank to have activated, and then I can drop 1 unit of Hammer Fist Troopers and then shoot at it, and then drop 1 unit of Hammer Fist Troopers and then shoot at it, between the 2 units, that's 20 dice. I should kill that assassin. Because they don't have a ton of hit points, for example. You know, where you might struggle is into something like a tunneler, where it not only has shields, but also has a lot of hit points and high armor. And they might not be the best for that, but that's what your magma cannons are for and stuff like that. You know, so you've got to keep that type of thing in mind, is that the Hammer Fist Drop Troopers, they are a positional piece. And if your opponent's not careful, you're going to be able to position them in a way that's really going to punish them for being sloppy. A good example, and I know she's 14, so I'm not trying to pick on her. My daughter and I played a game last night, and she actually played a really great game. And I want to talk about that real quick also. Again, welcome to my ADD addled mind. We jump from topic to topic. We went into the game, we played one of the new missions. I forget what it's called, but it's the one where it plays like Control, but instead of scoring for being in your opponent's deployment zone, you score for being in the center of the table. So it's based off of total unit strength in the center of the table, cut into thirds. And then the scoring is, that's not what we played. I'm a liar. We played Bodyguard. So we played Bodyguard. We have played that mission, but last night we played Bodyguard. We went into Bodyguard, and that's the one where you put, you know, your tokens on 2 units, blah, 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 blah. And her plan, she deployed first. Her plan was to basically hide her 2 units. And she was like, I'm just going to hide these 2 here in the scoring zone, but far enough away from you that you can't get to me without a lot of struggle. She said, I'm not playing to win, Dad. I just want a tie. That's all I want. And I understand, because when she and I play, you know, she's 14, and I've been playing these types of games for almost triple her lifetime. So I do understand it. But I told her, I said, hey, I love you here. I don't play for ties, I'm either going to win or I'm going to lose, and that's okay. So one of us is going to lose this game. And she was like, well, I hope it's you. But she played it really well. And I had my Hammer Fist drop troopers. I kept one unit on the table and put one unit in deep strike. And I really considered dropping that unit down where her objective holders were. But she was smart, and she actually had like a line of units around them too. Like she had 2 Leaper units, and those were the ones holding the objectives. And then she had wrapped them in a unit of murder birds. She had a Plague Lord and an Aberration hanging out back there. And it was one of those where, if I would have come down, I might have killed the dudes holding the objective, but I would have immediately lost those drop troopers. So I ended up bringing them down on the other side of the table to clear out the rest of her stuff. Long story short, I was able to get across the table with the bodyguard, score bonus points, but I was really impressed with her positioning, But that's where the Hammer Fist drop troopers come into play, is she knew they could deep strike. So she had to keep some of her army back to secure that objective, to secure her Leapers. Because had she not, I could have put those drop troops, both squads, into deep strike, because she deployed first. I could have put them both into deep strike, brought them both down, and just tagged both of her scoring units, and then just had my way with them. Just walked in there, taking them all out, snatched up those objectives. So that's to me why the drop troopers are so clutch. Because in an army where your movement is 5, I think it's really important to have 1 or 2 units that you can choose to hold back and then bring down in turn 2 or turn 3. And they have good enough shooting that they will threaten whatever they come down next to. And then they have good enough melee that unless your opponent is going to drown them in a literal bucket of dice, they have to think twice about sending things. Leapers, you would, unless it's a big squad, I would think twice about sending Leapers into them. Because, yeah, it's a lot of dice. I think they're, 3 or 4 attacks each, but it's AP1. And these boys have anti-tank, or heavy armor. So you're going to hit on, if you get a clean charge, I think you're going to hit on 3s, but you're then going to damage on 6s, and then you have to confirm with 5s. And that's going to cut your damage mathematically, literally in half. So it's one of those where you really got to think about what you send into them, and that's what I think makes the drop troopers shine. Are the Forge Guard better? I don't know. Like I said, we'll do kind of a side-by-side at the end of this. And then to wrap up the list, I do have the Sternhammer Battle Tank, and it just seemed like a no-brainer. I did give it the armor upgrade. I think if I were to... Well, we'll get to that in a minute. It's headstrong, heavy armor track, vehicle, controlled fire. It does have the 8-shot quad heavy hailstorm cannon. So it's 8 shots, AP2, anti-aircraft, and pinning. That thing is the bee's knees. That is rough. It won't chew up tanks, but outside of heavy armor, and even heavy armor, you're not necessarily doing poorly into unless it's like armor 8 heavy armor. If it's armor 7, armor 6 heavy armor, sure, you've got to confirm it, but with AP2, you're knocking that down to a 4 or a 5. Whereas, armor 8, or in this case 9, like with this tank, you're knocking it down to a 6 or a 7. That starts to get a little rough. But AP2 with pinning and anti-aircraft and 8 shots is really spicy. And it can, with 36-inch range, it doesn't necessarily have to move a ton. You can move it. It's really nice to have on the table. And I don't know if it's a linchpin unit yet. It is definitely a linchpin for me based on how I want to play. Because I don't play tank heavy. I don't play vehicle heavy. I tend to play more infantry focused. If any of you haven't guessed by now from all my list breakdowns and stuff. I want to be able to score points. I like to be able to move and position things. I like to have trading pieces. What I don't like is I don't like having a bunch of vehicles that can't score points. And then if I lose them, it's such a big hit to my damage output that I could struggle. It's one of the things I enjoy about rats is I can bring a lot of trading pieces, and it allows me to kind of throw crawlers up there, get shot off the table, bait out charges, things like that. It's a lot different with the Forge Fathers having a much more limited amount of bodies. I can't just throw things out there kind of, I don't want to say willy-nilly, but I have to be a little bit smarter in some ways with my positioning, and in some ways I don't. It's kind of weird. I would say it's a lateral like move in terms of how important positioning is. It's just different. But that tank is nutty, man. I've played against it a few times, unfortunately for me, and I'm not knocking the guy. He had never really played before, and it was when we first started getting into Firefight. But that experience helped kind of shaped my opinion on Forge Fathers because we were relatively new and there were a lot of mistakes made. And in retrospect, I understand that now. But at the time, it was just like, oh my gosh, these are awful. But coming from 40K, there were turns in which he was doubling up on orders, things like that. And it wasn't intentional. It wasn't malicious. Like I said, he just came from 40K, wasn't really thinking about it. I was fairly new to the game also. I wasn't really thinking about it. And then when I look back on it, I was like, oh, wait a second. They're not quite as bad as I think in my head because they don't do all these things that they do in my head because of this one experience I had with them. But I have played against this tank a few times, and every time it's done work. Like, I have to account for it. I have to respect it. And that's one of those things where, man, it doesn't have a bad matchup so far. Into Asterians, it can peel shields off, and it'll actually roll enough dice that it could punch through after peeling shields off if your roll is good enough. Into Rats, it'll mulch hordes, hand out pin tokens. Into Night Stalkers, again, unless they're just like hit the dirt stealth, like stacking all the -1 to hits, and even then you can still get some hits. Like there's an order that lets you re-roll all your hit rolls. It's spicy, but you can do it. And there's ways to turn off the stealth keyword. So they have tools for dealing with that type of stuff. But with that volume and pinning, it's such a utilitarian unit that could go against just about anything. And then if you want to see the breakdown, there it is. I have 9 units. 3 of them are troop, 1 support, 2 specialists, 2 command, 14 total unit strength. I have 58 assault dice, 57 shoot dice, and then my average shot AP is 1.76 and assault AP is 0.5. This isn't something I really pay attention to. I don't look at my little analytics box there. I just make lists and I just play. I'm a kind of an intuitive player as opposed to an analytical player. I don't worry so much about data and math. I do use it for decision making, but for me, if something doesn't feel right, it doesn't matter how good the math is, because if it doesn't feel right to me, I just can't make it work. So we're going to look at the faction orders real briefly. Like I said, I will do a breakdown. We'll talk about them again. This unit's ranged attacks ignore the penalty for a target being in cover, and that's 2 command points. You can shut off cover, which is really nice because then you don't have to steady aim. And the other thing you could also do is you could steady aim against something that's like stealthy and in cover. So you could steady aim, shoot, use this order, and be on your flats. And then if you boost it for 3 command points, it gained all its ranged attacks gain the pinning keyword, which is also good. It's very solid. I haven't had a situation where I have needed it, but it's one of those where I like having that tool in the toolbox. Unnatural Sprinters is one that I've used a lot. Any unit without the vehicle keyword can add 3 inches to any advance or sprint action it performs during this activation. So I use that to get my bodyguards across the table. I was, 5-inch movement. I'm within range to get an order. Bam. They're going to get extra 3 inches. Bam. They're going to get an extra 3 inches. And that allowed me to clear 16 inches in 2 turns instead of 10. It also is good if you need to charge something, stuff like that. So it's such a great utility order. That's probably one that will end up getting used every game for me at least once. Target assist, any unit with the vehicle keyword, it can ignore the effects of the stealthy keyword, and it gains weight of fire 1. So again, you could shut off stealthy for a vehicle, so that's real good for the Sternhammer, for example, for my list. I think that's a fantastic order. I haven't used it yet, but I haven't played against anything with a ton of stealth yet with Forge Fathers. So we'll see. I imagine I'm going to hit Night Stalkers in this league fairly soon. We will see. And then we have Crestersen's Fury. The unit may increase all its trademark weapons by 1 die. So you get 1 extra die for each trademark weapon when you do a shoot or steady aim action. This is also one that I used a lot. Those rifles are good, but being able to effectively double their shots is the bee's knees. That's awesome. You know, for a unit of 8, I have 6 rifles. I have 1 pistol. But even if I had 5 rifles, because a lot of times when I'm shooting, I'm in range for the pistol. But the pistol's trademark anyway. So again, if they're in range, I can double their dice. I can go from 6 shots to 12 shots. And that is a great tool to have, because now not only am I dangerous to elites, you know, like enforcers, but now I'm dangerous to a squad of 10. I might not kill them all, but getting 12 shots hitting on 4s, I can at least, like, I could potentially put them under half strength. You know, I can dwindle their damage output down enough that they become less of a bother for me. Faragir overcomes. All trademark weapons in this unit can reroll any failed to hit rolls. But if you pay 3 instead, all ranged weapons in this unit can reroll any failed to hit rolls. So for 3 command points, that tank can just reroll its hit rolls. Now, does it make more sense to give it target assist? Or Earthshaker rounds, for example? Yeah, maybe. It's just funnier to just reroll hit rolls. Yes, it's expensive. But controlled aggression, any unit without the vehicle keyword, it gains Frenzy 4. I think that's very good, but I haven't played much melee yet. I do want to, I'm actually ordering them tomorrow. I'm going to get a couple boxes of Thorgrim to add to this, because I think those things look awesome. Like, they look incredible. And they're going to be a blast on the table. That'll probably be what goes in my transport. So, and then we already talked about the command order. So, what I like to do so far, the way I have played them, this list, is I have put my command units behind my tank and my APC. From here on out, I'll probably call them both tanks. I do know that an APC is not a tank. It is an armored personnel carrier. But for now, we'll just call them both tanks. I put my command units behind my tanks, so that line of sight is blocked. They can't just like get sniped by somebody with a cheeky 48-inch range gun that's height 4 and can just do 1,000,000 damage. Like, hide them. That being said, I keep 1 unit of Steel Warriors in the APC, obviously. And then I keep the other 2 on the table. And I try to keep them within regeneration range. And I have played them I don't play them turtly. I don't just sit. There's a lot of movement. I might sit for a turn, or I might sit in stages. So what I mean by that is I might move 1 squad up and then shoot, and then move 1 squad up. So my first turn is kind of getting the squads in position. They might sprint instead. But then what ends up happening so far in the few games I've played is I kind of shoot with 1 squad and then overwatch if they're in the marksman aura. And then the other one can move up, and then I've got 1 squad kind of move blocking them with a controlled fire charge reaction, and then the other squad can kind of, with my positioning, I can shoot past them but still have a wall of bodies to try to break up charges. It doesn't always work, but that's kind of how I've done it, is almost, if you've ever been in the military, we call it bounding overwatch, where you have 1 unit that shoots while the other unit moves, and then they get into position, and then they shoot and the other unit moves. And that's kind of how I've set up this list to work, is a lot of bounding overwatch to keep the dwarves able to move. It is a little slower than if I were playing rats and I just can kind of sprint things. But because I have less trading pieces, I have to be a little more careful with stuff. So that's going to wrap up this video. It is a little bit of a long one, but I hope everybody enjoyed talking about my league list. And again, I look forward to seeing everybody at the Michigan GT.